Okay. Actually, you know what? I am going to change the title for this one, because for this one, we have to honestly call it what it is, which is Clone Wars, or Send in the Clones. Which one is it, Clone Wars or Send in the Clones?
I like Clone Wars, but it's copyright, but I guess we can send in the clones.
Okay, Send in the Clones. That is what we will call this part. And Bit is in charge of this part because he has actually done all the hard research. Why, I remember this. He has done all the hard research for us. And he is predominant fan of Send in the Clones. So take it away, Bit.
Well, everybody who's my subscribers is going to go, oh God, Mr. Bit starting up setting an OS 10 free again. Well, I'm not going to make any more debate videos, but I thought the clones were a very important part. Because what I don't like is that people blame the clones for being the downfall of Apple. That's not true. Apple had already failed so much to the point that the clone program was the last desperate measure to try to save Apple. And while it increased their market share, in 1995, they made $11.5 billion in revenue. That I believe, if you included inflation, took until, 2005 to match that?
Yeah, we figured this out last night. Like, you took inflation into account, it took to 2005, and, you know, that was including iPod. No, it was 2007.
Was it?
Yeah, we wrote the notes here, right here. It was until 2007 to hit
adjusted for inflation.
Adjusted for inflation, to get back to the same level of revenue they had in '95, and you know that now
now they've surpassed it way beyond.
Yeah, no, they surpassed behind that. But, you know, it's important to note, you know, that wasn't just Macs. That was everything. iTunes, iPods, Apple TV.
iTunes,
yeah. Now, granted, it's not fair to harp on them for that being a combination of everything, because even if nothing had gone wrong, I doubt seriously they would have been in the exact same business in 2007 they were in '95.
Yeah,
That's not practical.
Yeah, the thing is that even Jobs himself tried to, which so many Apple users disagree, he did try to maintain the clone program. He just wanted it at a different price level. And because none of them, which was part of the Chirp program, agreed to the prices that Jobs had, he shut it down. And fine. But the clones were not the problem during those years. And we have the links that we can provide in this video that state what were the mistakes of Apple. Apple had, I don't know, what was the figure again? It was something along the lines of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of inventory misplacement. Either it was a shortcoming or overstocking of a certain model. I think there was what was the number? It was something $billion worth that they were unfulfilled in 1 year.
Yeah.
Because it made too little of a certain Power Mac model.
Well, no, and this is why I was suggesting it was better to talk about it in this part, because I think this is one of the reasons Apple as a company is deathly afraid of having a mid-tower. They're deathly afraid of making this mistake again. You know, of having too many models, of, you know, that they can't properly manage them because they're such a tiny company. They're like, we don't want any more models. You know, no, we want less models. We want.
I can understand.
Why they're an industry player? They are a small company. They don't. I mean, okay. Perhaps small's the wrong word, but Apple has a finite amount of resources.
Well, they've got a big-ass bank account, but they choose to use their resources. They choose to be lean. They choose to be lean.
Yeah. Well, no, and see that this is one of the things I honestly see as one of the things that's wrong with Apple as a company.
Choosing to be lean?
No. There's a difference between choosing to be lean and penny pinching. There are several times where I honestly think it would behoove Apple as a company to loosen the reins a little bit on some of those cash reserves to help get things done a lot more efficiently. There are times.
You know what? You have a point, because the latest Fortune magazine basically stated that expenses for a goal that Steve Jobs sets basically is not even calculated. They will spend any amount of money to get to an end result. That was stated in the Fortune magazine based upon the leadership of Apple. So then you have a point. It's just if the vision agrees with your vision is what it comes down to.
Right. And there are times I really do think it actually makes them more efficient to do it a little more this way than the super lean way that they want to do it.
And basically I want to get back to it. I challenge anyone to say otherwise, because I have the numbers, the facts, the figures, the revenue, the profit margins, everything in black and white, and we'll provide links.
Yeah, we're going to put these links to Apple's real problems.
The clone program was not the problem. It was not the problem. It was the last attempt to save Apple, and it did increase its market share exponentially. It was up to Apple to keep its inventory correct. It had a major shortfall where it just failed to predict how popular its Power Mac would have been in that year, and the actual figure is in the articles that we'll post in this article. It was $1 billion something.
If I thought YouTube would let me, I'd honestly just post everything we have here, but I know the character cap's going to cap it where I can't put.
No, the description has it. I think it lets you a lot, but the description of the video should allow you to browse.
If it'll let me put every one of these in, I'm just going to put what we have here in the document.
Yeah, because it was $1 billion something of unfulfilled orders. Apple made its own mistakes, and so many of the former Apple executives, including Scully, including Jean-Louis Gasset.
Oh no, and I want to comment on that.
Who was an evangelist against licensing out, changed his opinion of saying we should have licensed.
Well, no, and here's the real reason I think Scully was just so paranoid. I mean, he had just come from Pepsi. You know, and the whole Pepsi versus Coke thing. That was the mindset that had been ingrained into him. And then he comes over, and now he's in charge of Apple.
Well, actually, Scully had a taste of what happened with the Apple II ROM. The Apple II ROM was actually still in the licensed out. It didn't work out well for Apple. It's just because they did it on an offshoot. They didn't make it part of their business. They did not make it part of their business strategy to say this is how you license out software properly. They didn't. It was always an afterthought, like security was for the early parts of Microsoft an afterthought.
Yeah.
Licensing out properly with Apple was an afterthought.
No. And like you're saying, you can't just license and it magically makes money. You have to do it properly in the proper way, and so on and so forth. And honestly, every single one of us, as geeks, whether we love or hate Apple, love, we should be thankful that Scully was so paranoid for various reasons, because it's the only reason that we have the competition we have in the industry today. If that had not happened, realistically, it's very conceivable that it would be 98% Apple.
You're going off the quote of one of the executives that said if we licensed that, we would be the Microsoft of today.
Well, no, they would have been, because Microsoft would have never made Windows. They would have just kept making all that technology for OS X.
Absolutely correct. Bill Gates was not interested in making Windows because he wanted to make his software for the Mac until until Apple said no.
And you know what? Some fanboys will get on top of us and go, "Oh no, they had every intention of they'll take the Pirates of Silicon Valley history on. It's not." Take this from old farts that have used Windows 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0, and remember that it was basically an application for DOS that was this like environment that did things. It's very obvious from the way Windows got started. It was an afterthought with no other options. It was not Plan A. It's like.
Yeah, Windows is a direct result of Apple saying no to licensing.
Mm-hmm.
Period.
Well, honestly, now we're getting too far off on parallel universe land. But I would also argue we may not have had Linux or BSD, and the reason I say that
Linux started earlier.
No. But here was the thing. Part of the reason that the idea for Linux came about and the idea that we needed BSD was because we saw competition, but we saw competition where it was going to be A versus B. If we hadn't had that competition, if it had been largely predominated by A only, the idea to get these projects underway may not have occurred to these people. Because the idea of the competition may not have come up to them. Why it wasn't so much about Windows, it was DOS versus.
Wait a minute! I thought GNU and then Linux was primarily a offshoot to say.
The GNU.
Wait a minute! Damn you, Bell Labs, for restricting this code because they gave it to the universities, and then we have the Berkeley University that eventually that's what stemmed everything. And then the licensing of that created the open movement, which we let
it spurred the open movement, and it is.
No.
See, that's the thing. I want to cover this. It is responsible for the GNU thing, but here's the thing: where we got what it was, and this is like a debate, and we're getting off into Linux land because we have there's purists who will go, it's GNU Linux, not Linux. What it was the GNU project was developing all these things, but they didn't have a core. And there was licensing early with the Berkeley thing because of the whole debate. What made GNU stick was that Linus wrote the Linux kernel, which then got put into GNU, which had everything but a kernel. And that's what made that sign up. What gave Linus the idea, I want this other thing, and then, he discovered, he's like, we'll just put them together and they'll be fun, was he didn't like the, you only had a real choice between A and B. That was what inspired him to create C. He's like, we need a C. Without
really? I won't argue with you. I always thought that Linus' mentality was that Unix needed to be a Unix-like system since it was closed. I always thought that, but I won't argue.
That was his logic, but I'm not. Like I said, Linux and BSD may have still came about, but one of the reasons they got such traction was because, and part of the reasons they were inspired was because of, yes, the lack of open, but also the A versus B, and they got such traction because of the A versus B thing.
Okay, let's get out of 1985.
Anyways, we're going off on parallel geekdom.
Yeah,
Getting back into licensing OS 10. Sorry.
Anyway, so you want to go ahead now? I mean, basically, we have all these links. We'll talk about sales trends and things like that. We can go down to a video that I made, which why don't you just do my video where it says OS 10.3 down here. It started at the time interval, and that'll show all the quotes that former executives have stated, including Jean-Louis Gasset, Steve Wozniak, and everybody. And leave it at that. I mean, it's an old video of mine. Anybody can go visit Mr. Bit 10 on YouTube and hit my playlists and see all the OS 10.3 arguments there. I'm not going to rehash, but
think you're taking the next ones out of context, but
No, the next ones are they're not out of context. The next ones have to do with Steve Jobs' mentality of saying, that's the reason why I want to license out OS 10. He was saying that Microsoft Windows has to be offset, period. And he was a software company at that time. That software for software, Windows, there needs to be an alternative to Windows. He gave up Next Computers, and on that statement was Next Software, period. And he had licensed out Next for Intel, Howard, everything else. And there were all these projects going on, and his clear vision was to what I'm talking about. Let's talk about Mac Defender, that virus or the social engineering thing that's hitting the Mac today, which I think is silly because any Mac user who's lived it, we've had the little viruses go through.
But you know what's funny, Ben? Mac users are falling for that.
Well, hey, it's social engineering. But you know what? I talked over somebody.
Go ahead.
I was surprised.
Anyways, continue a bit.
What I was saying is that perhaps some of the people that are falling for it may be switchers. You know, have we considered that if you're coming from a PC mentality of saying, well, we automatically have antivirus, Microsoft shoves it down our throat because Windows 7 starts alerting us if we don't have it. Maybe Apple's telling me I need to get Mac Defender. Because I think a certain demographic, if you've been with Apples as long as I have, you're going to go, dude, that's a total scam.
We should get a Mac has with viruses.
What?
We should have linked that in there, man. Alright, anyway.
Wait a minute. We're not talking about viruses. This is not a virus. This is a social engineering.
Okay.
Wait a minute. This is what we're going to get into the other links. I do not fault Windows for social engineering. Not one of my videos criticizes Windows for social engineering exploits. If you fool the user, then you fool the user. And that's why I say market share is not the driver of viruses. Because if someone's going to tell me that, it's market share, then why the hell are you not doing it for Linux and everybody else? If you're going to make a social engineering exploit, or not actually exploit's the wrong one, if you're going to make it a social engineering trap for a user, then you're an idiot for not going after the other platforms that have millions of users that you can also fool. Because if the objective is to fool the user, then all users are equal. And you're an idiot as a business person if you're making money off of it, that if you're not going after the millions of Mac users and the millions of Linux users. Don't come to me and say, I'm just going after Windows. That doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Social engineering exploits are hard to do on Linux because everybody changes their theme.
Say again?
What he was getting at, and that was something I was going to get at here. The easiest systems to target for this social engineering exploit are OS 10 and Windows. And the reason I say this is for the reason Commodore brought up. On a Linux system, you have no earthly idea what theme or tweaks I've done to my desktop. And if you go stock KDE, I guarantee you it doesn't look anything like my desktop. For 90% plus of Linux systems.
Yeah, but we're talking about a browser.
No. But if you've never seen these, here's how they come up. Like the better ones I've seen, what they do is they come up and they look like Windows X. If they detect Windows XP, they look like Windows XP. If they detect Windows 7, it looks like a Windows 7 pop-up alert. On OS 10, it looks like something that would pop up from your system. In the case of this exploit, it looks like that little OS 10. Hi, you need to do the so they think
that make it look native.
Exactly, and that's what makes these work. Now, you and I, a more sophisticated user, goes, and I see some of these. I'm like, you know what? That looks pretty damn good. If I didn't know this was bullshit, I'd be convinced it was local. I wouldn't know it's an iframe. I wouldn't know that my browser just went to full screen and popped up a hover Java element, because that's what they do. They hijack your browser, they take it to the full screen mode, so you can't even tell you're in a browser window. You think it's a native pop-up thing, and it looks, the theme for that site that's popped up looks just like your desktop environment. You're convinced you're in your OS and have gotten a notification. You and I know bullshit. I don't get this type of notification.
I've been, of course, well, I mean, we're talking about a normal user. I think that's why switchers are probably more susceptible to downloading an active file. They're like, wow, they're maybe Apple's suggesting something to me. But if we're going to talk about exploits, look, this is where we're talking about the links in the bottom of our show notes here. We've lived it, you and I. Maybe not Commodore and Philip, but you and I have lived this.
Well, no, and this is one of the reasons.
All the Win32 variants that have nothing to do with fooling the user. They have nothing to do with.
No, those were exploits. But as far as
are Windows breaches, period.
Well, but as far as for the social engineering exploit, this is one of the reasons I'm exceedingly annoyed that somewhere between the line when what is now OS 10 went from being Next OS to becoming OS, because a lot of people don't realize this, Next OS was almost as customizable as Linux. In terms of you could get in there, you could customize everything. It wasn't customizing the environment was not a bad thing in Next OS. When it became OS 10, all of that got taken out. And I don't know why, because that would honestly make social engineering like this 10 times harder, because they wouldn't have a clue what the theme on the other end is going to be.
I can see where you're going with it. Obviously, if somebody wants to make a pop-up that looks native to the system, it would be harder if something was very customizable. Obviously, yeah. Now
that may get easier in HTML5, because one of the things we're incorporating in HTML5 is the ability for the browser to talk to other parts of your system, and it wouldn't surprise me if somebody is dedicated enough to figure out some kind of JavaScript test to figure out what your settings are and clone them for a seamless experience. And I can see that being useful in an HTML5 app, but I also see that being used in social engineering exploits like this.
Yeah.
I keep giving the bad guys ideas.
Oops, I'm sorry, I didn't say that.
Did he come over to say, what did you say?
He said I gave the bad guys ideas.
I mean, let's put it this way. Look, Windows had a technology target, okay? I'm not going to fault them for it, but they had technology targets like making active desktops, ActiveX executing email. They wanted to make port calling off of the network easier, but it made themselves more susceptible to security risks. And these were exploits like Code Red, Win32, all of which, there are so many variants of which. But let's talk about like the Slapper worm, which was also a worm designed to go after Apache, which had the majority of the market, still has a majority of the market share of servers. And yet, the Apache and the Linux servers was far easier able to contain and stop the spread of the worm versus IIS. It's a known fact. And the thing of it is that I argue, when I talk about viruses, system exploits. The user is out of the equation. It is the operating system that is vulnerable and not fooling the user. If you're going to come to me and say market share matters, then when it comes to a social engineering thing, then you're a fool if you wanted to say, well, I'm only going to be after Windows users. It's utterly insane to me to say I'm going to ignore another millions of other users that could potentially be more income for me on the Mac side and all this other stuff.
Well, and on that side of things, we should note, while we're ganging up on Windows here, over the years, there have been
Windows is way better. Wait a minute.
No. The other thing I was going to say, modern Windows is way better, but also, over the years, there have been some system exploits that OS X and Linux have been susceptible to. Where it required no interaction from the end user, and it didn't matter that it was a multi-user system. There were ways to remotely, without permission, gain root credentials.
Yeah, the thing of it is that I will do that. I applaud Windows from where it's come from. Windows is, what is it, 10 times less the amount. I don't know. I mean, it's an astronomical amount less system exploits. Windows is it's still one of the main system I develop for, because most of my clients are, and I can tell you that. I will tell you as a Mac user, I've heard, I'll say, John Gruber was on a podcast, and he's a pretty big, I don't know what the correct word is. He's an Apple enthusiast, maybe. I mean, I think he's got pretty fair arguments, but I will say that he would say that you still don't need antivirus for a system. And he actually went on to say you probably don't even need antivirus for the Windows. Okay, Windows is pretty damn secure. If you are a smart user, you probably don't need antivirus on anything. Okay? Now, the thing of it is that some of these exploits that I'm talking about weren't even, they would register on an antivirus system after the fact, but the heuristics involved that it exploited natural pathways within Windows that even a heuristics program would say, it probably is normal until it starts getting more invasive to the system.
Well,
wait a minute. I, as a Mac user, had antivirus on my Mac. Now, the antivirus systems that were for the Mac until ESET came out were pretty dodgy, because you worry about system performance. I will tell you right now, whether it's a shameless plug or not, the ESET, who makes Nod 32 for Windows, has a Mac security program for Mac, and I am on all my Macs. It doesn't slow down anything. It is an awesome program. The ESET suite is the only one I'll use over anybody else. I don't get the Norton or the Symantec or whatever.
Yeah.
Any of that stuff. I use the ESET suite. It is awesome. I have no performance loss that is noticeable to me. I'm sure if I benchmark some things, there's an inherent layer.
Well, and it's going to be by the fact that you're dedicating resources to running something.
Yes. But while I am a smart user, I don't go on to dodgy websites the best that I can manage. I have lived the days of OS 9. I have lived the days of XP, Windows 2000, Windows Server 2003, and I will tell you, you can go 10 years and not have an infection. And the one day that it happens and you're not prepared, the cost to you is enormous.
Now, I would argue that depending on what your habits are, that industry is... Well, I agree with Bit. I think every system, regardless of whether it's Windows, Mac, or Linux, should have some equivalent antivirus, and it's worth the money.
Actually, it does make Nod 32 for Linux.
Yeah, I know that. That's what I was going to say. That same thing is available for Linux. You should definitely... And they are a very good company.
I heard good things about Nod 32 from Windows users.
Yeah, ESET seems to be awesome. Now...
But what I was going to get into is, even for exploit-wise, one thing that has changed in recent years, and part of me likes this and part of me hates it, is that this proactive quarantining has started taking effect, in which most of the browsers and various applications that in any way, shape, or form interact with the internet are having a form of anti-Trojan, anti-worm, antivirus built into them, in which if they detect anything that even remotely resembles it, they will refuse to communicate with it. They'll basically put a quarantine shield up and force the end user to override it. So if you're not ignoring these messages, and to put it in perspective, IE8 up, it's even gotten to Internet Explorer, do this. So it's going forward, I think it's becoming harder and harder for somebody who isn't purposely overriding those controls to, even with a system exploit, because you do have to communicate with the other system for the exploit to execute. and it refuses to communicate with the off-site thing. Now, there are still ways to go around, but we have hit a point where pretty much system-wide, including in Windows, going forward, while we still have a lot of XP systems out there, the types of worms that could just propagate on their own without any interaction from the client system are almost non-existent. You know, you do have to at least go to the web page or have the software.
Well, the old worms weren't. The old worms actually, if as soon as the net protocols, the RCP or RPC or remote procedure calls hit, you could get the worms. Remember?
When people would tell me back in the late '90s, "Oh, you're nuts. Nobody will ever set that." And then we had things like Blaster. I'm like, I'm not so crazy now, am I? But because we've had so many things like that, what they've built into all the applications that communicate with things like that is a type of antivirus. Where if the packet's coming across, it's like, wait a minute, this looks like a virus. I'm not touching it. Which is a good thing.
To me, the cost and the performance that I still maintain from the product, for me, is worth it. Now, any Mac user or any Linux user practices the same. You don't run in admin mode. You run in a standard user mode, and then you use your admin password for all the changes that you do in the system.
Something I'd love to see in Windows.
Yeah, you have your user shell, and then you can kill the shell, reinitiate another one, and migrate. But you can't explain that to a normal user and say, well, create a normal user, don't run an admin. I mean, these are a lot of things. Sorry, these are a lot of things that you have to explain.
Limited user by default on Windows 2, because in Windows.
The reason that's so hard in Windows is because Windows is
the registry prohibits a true.
Yeah, basically there isn't a true user thing. One of the rumors I heard
they have a shell. They do have a shell in the kernel space, but the problem is that through the registry, it can still. There are options that it can still pervade.
Right.
The thing of it is that on a normal shell that we use with lists instead of a central location like we have with Linux and Unix systems, is that we can kill it totally, and we don't have to worry about dependencies.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? We can just totally just wipe it out. It's gone. Reinitiate a new user and migrate. With a central repository like the registry, it's a little bit harder to do that.
Well, and see that's one of the things This was a rumor, and I never saw it, but I trust the people I heard it from. There was a rumor that in a Windows 7 alpha, Microsoft was toying around with the idea of throwing away the registry and moving over to something like that. They chose...
No, I don't. Look, I like the registry. And actually, I will eventually make my freaking video. It's very technical and a lot of crap. The registry is a great idea. I mean, it's
poorly executed.
Executed. Exactly. They could have done things to it to make it not such a problem or a headache that it's been for Microsoft in the years, to put it lightly. There are obviously pros and cons to each, but Microsoft had to execute the registry correctly. It still is a very powerful tool. I think it could have been better, and they wouldn't have this problem of being labeled, registry problems, this and that.
How did we get here from licensing OS 10? Not that I'm complaining.
Because we got into viruses.
Yes, okay.
We concluded the clones. We don't need to get into it because we're going to post all the links. It's a lot.
Right. I do recommend. Why it's a lot of stuff. I recommend y'all read some of that stuff because it's just there
are articles from the day that explain the inherent. Apple did it to themselves through mainly inventory problems and too many models and this and that. You really can't even quantify the amount of the clones had an exponential benefit, and you could say, there was also a negative to it. I mean, it's very hard to quantify other than the market share, but the real numbers are from the total mistakes of inventory control and product wise.
Okay, do we have anything else nostalgic or Apple-based we want to go into?
I think we hit it, because this has been a long...
I know.
Like the G3 monitor, that was the lamp.
Okay, I tell you what. Is that link still in here for the lamp?
Yeah, right there.
Oh, we gotta show the G because I'm gonna do that, dude.
Which one?
What is that?
The
GP lamp.
It's the mod one, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
gotta show that.
we're going to close out with 2 videos. First, y'all are going to see the Newton ad. Because I'm sorry, it's Apple.
That was ahead of its time. The Newton was ahead.
But see, the reason I'm going to play the Newton is because there's always people who are like, oh no, like first, it's on top, market share, everything. You know, we brought up Newton to pump. Okay, but the other thing is, love or hate Apple, and this is one of the reasons, you know, this is why I don't say plastic cases are bad, because you can never make this lamp out of a modern Mac, and it, you know, whether you love or hate Apple, it does kind of look cool. So we're gonna play both those videos, and we're gonna put links to everything, but we're gone now. If y'all want to stay around and watch those few things, kudos for y'all. If not, peace out all. Sorry this was so long. God, we're on like almost 3 hours now.
That's awesome.
You know what? No. We have to put a code in here. You know, for people who watch.
You have watched this long? Alright.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's gonna be. No, that would be too obvious. This is gonna be part 3, but if you're gonna watch part.
Put in the code word gigabit Ethernet.
Yeah, gigabit Ethernet. Okay. It's like, peace out all. Gigabit Ethernet in peace.
Who is Newton?
Who is Newton? Newton is spontaneous. Newton is intelligent. Newton is worldly. Newton is friendly.
And I'm Mel Newton, and this is my wife Helen Newton.
Newton is like your guardian angel, always looking for ways to help you out. Newton talks to fax machines and laser printers, to telephones and computers. Newton is a great communicator. Newton is for all you mobile professionals out there who like cool stuff.
Thank you.